Tonight, Rebel News goes inside the belly of the beast. I'm at a United Nations conference in Ottawa whose mission is to create a plastics registry and an international anti-plastic treaty. It's April 23rd, and this is the Ezra Levant Show. Shame on you, you censorious bug. Ezra Levant here for Rebel News. Look at this. It's just a little sign here at the UN Convention Against Plastics, but it reads like it's something, I don't know, out of Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. Grulak, Weog, SIDS, EEG, or is that pronounced EG, DSA. What does that even mean? When I was a kid, SIDS stood for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. It was something parents were terrified about. I'll tell you what all those things mean. All those things are a kind of jargon that the high priest class uses to separate the elite from the peasants. These are deeply meaningful things. Grulak. Nothing's more important than Grulak. What, you don't know what Grulak is? What are you, some lowly taxpayer? I don't know if you get my point. It's this. The UN is so detached from the real lives of any country, Canada in particular, but I gotta say, there are delegates here, I can tell, from very poor countries in Africa, for example. But their folks got on jet planes, flew first class to Ottawa, staying in five-star hotels, eating gourmet meals to talk about Grulak, Weog, SIDS, and EG, and things that people in their home countries wouldn't even understand or know about. There are real pollution problems around the world. Plastic straws in Canada are not one of them. But the fact that they make it impenetrable to the common person tells you that they find ordinary people repulsive. They live in a self-perpetuating world. In fact, I'm not sure if you can see, but down there, you can see in the distance, there's a booth to sign up for next year's party in Korea. So this movable feast, this annual reunion, this get-together of the fancy people, today it's in Ottawa. It's going to be in Korea. A few months ago it was in Nairobi. This is a jet-set class telling you not to use plastic straws and not to fly. What's this? This is the translator headset. Of course, you're at the United Nations. They have, I think, 6 official languages. What do you think it's made out of? Wood? It's not made out of paper. It's made out of plastic. In fact, walking around this convention center, there's almost nothing that isn't plastic. Of course, the fibers in the carpet are plastic. The garbage cans are plastic. The plastic single-use lids in the coffee dispensers are plastic. There is almost nothing in this place that's not plastic. I mean, I was showing you the sign a moment ago with words like Grulak and other impenetrable jargon. The sign's not made out of wood. It's made out of plastic. And have you ever heard of latex paint? That's plastic. And of course, there's 2 other kinds of plastic in this place. I think the second most important kind of plastic they have, I don't know if you've looked at your Canadian currency lately, but the dollar bills or $5 bills, $20 bills, they're made of plastic, not paper. And the most important kind of plastic here are the fake plastic politicians. I stepped outside the fancy schmancy Ottawa Conference Center because I wanted to see what's going on outside. The answer is not a lot, but across the street, they've built a bit of a plastic garbage display. And when I say they, I mean the government-funded protesters who are protesting the government-funded people inside. They're on the same team. And what's interesting to me about the garbage statue they've made is Ottawa's actually a pretty clean city. In fact, Canada's a pretty clean country. We don't throw our garbage in the ditch. We don't litter. Some people recycle, some people just throw it in the landfill, but we don't throw it in the ditch. So to make their impact, they have to create a fake act of pollution, because otherwise people would say, what are you talking about? This is actually a beautiful town, a beautiful city. I think the dirtiest city I've ever been to in my life in terms of things being thrown in the ditch was Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And and it was a lot of plastic pollution, I'll tell you that. They just threw things in the street, threw things in the alley, threw things in the water. I don't know how Canada can fix that. I don't know how a treaty that Canada signs can fix that. And I don't know how a plastics registry that says your plastic cutlery and plastic lids for coffee have to be registered and declared to the Canadian government. I don't know how that's going to clean up Port-au-Prince, Haiti. But I think my main message about this plastic protest outside the plastic conference is that it's all fingers on the same hand. I mean, look at on the sign behind me here. Freshly taped up posters. Oil and gas executives rake in profits. Canadian pay the price. Make polluters pay. And right above that, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister. Minister Freeland, make big polluters pay. And these, of course, are a message to the delegates inside, I presume. Well, I just went to the website, makepolluterspay.ca, and they're all government-funded NGOs. NGO stands for non-governmental organization, but they should be called GONGOs, government-organized non-government organizations. They get government grants. The politicians inside lobby the activists outside to lobby the politicians inside. And it's a circular loop of your money every way. Hey, I'm back. It's 4 p.m. I got to tell you, a lot has happened since I filmed that little intro in the main plenary area there. Boy, a ton of things have happened. First of all, I spoke with a skeptic. There actually is someone here who doesn't believe in a ban on plastics. I'll have an interview with him later on in the show. I wandered around and just saw all the different plastics things here. But really an interesting undercurrent of my entire day has been how the United Nations, environmentalist, liberal government establishment handles a skeptical journalist like me and my colleague Ezra Levant, who was also here. It's a bit of a miracle that we got these accreditations in the first place. They really delayed. We had to get a lawyer engaged, but in the end, they accredited me and several of my colleagues, and we came in, and I have to tell you, we've been on our best behavior in here, and by that I mean we're just being polite. That doesn't mean our questions aren't sharp, but you can ask a sharp question without shouting, without swearing. But I think the fact that we ask critical questions at all is so alien to these people. I mean, I should tell you, I was in a press conference a moment ago with Greenpeace. Greenpeace was hosting the press conference, and you know what a press conference is, right? You have some officials at the front and you have reporters in the audience. But at this press conference, after every remark, the audience applauded because the journalists who are here, other than us, I guess, are Me Too, ditto, environmental activist journalists who were applauding Greenpeace in a press conference. I'm sorry, that's not a real press conference, is it? So to have a critical question in the middle of that was so alien to them. In fact, there was this funny moment. I had asked Steven Guilbeault, the Environment Minister, a question, and I was super polite. And he gave an answer that wasn't satisfactory, but he gave an answer anyways. And a reporter for the Hill Times, which is sort of a lobbyist newspaper here in Ottawa, came up to me, and the most important thing to her was, how did you guys get in? Why are you here? What are you doing? She was appalled and shocked. And I mean, here you're at the United Nations conference to ban plastics. You got the Environment Minister up there. You got some international big shots. I don't know who they are, but if you're in the UN world, I guess they're big. And the number one news story this Hill Times reporter took away from that was, Rebel News is here. How come? And that shows you how insulated and what an echo chamber these things are. Anyways, I want to tell you this story, what happened to me. I came in and I did some wandering around and I did some little videos. And then I went outside because there was this weird garbage statue that some environmentalists put up. They just a bunch of garbage. And I think the point was, look at all this garbage, we got to clean it up. But the obvious response from my mind was, you brought the garbage here because it's not a garbagey place. You had to create a fake garbage pile that you then said, look at the garbage pile. Well, you brought it here, brother. I've been to some third world places in my life that has a lot of real garbage on the streets. Canada's not one of them. America's not one of them. I'm not saying that it's pristine, but of course, all the places in the world with the most garbage, especially plastic garbage, China, India, Africa, it's not Canada. And, so I was outside talking to a guy near the garbage pile, and walking by was Steven Guilbeault himself. This was outside the conference on the street. One of our team spotted him, and I got into Davos mode. And I right away ran up to him, and I thought to myself I could ask him a couple of questions, but the one that I really wanted an answer to was, remember when he banned me on Twitter a couple of years ago, and I sued him because he didn't ban me from his personal account, he banned me from his government account, and that's not his power to do so. 2 years later into the battle, I won, and he had to pay $20,000 in cost to us. He got the taxpayer to pay for it. Anyhow, I wanted to ask him about that. Here's how it looked. I was sort of huffing and puffing because I had a heavy backpack on and I was running and talking, but I think my message was clear and he didn't say a word. Take a look. Minister Guilbeault, you lost a court case to me and the judge ordered you to pay $20,000, but instead of paying it yourself, you had taxpayers pay for it. Why? Minister Guilbeault, the court ordered you to pay me $20,000, but you foisted that on taxpayers instead. You illegally blocked me on Twitter. You fought for 2 years. You used $250,000 in taxpayers' money, and then you stiffed the taxpayer and foisted the bill on them. Why did you do that? Why don't you think you have to answer for $20,000 of legal bills that you send to the taxpayer to pay your fine? Why aren't you talking about it? You had a lot to say in court. You claimed that your Twitter account was a personal account. If that's the case, why didn't you pay the fine personally? Do you disrespect taxpayers, Mr. Guilbeault? Sure seems that way. Hey, you're on the board of a Chinese agency, a Chinese government agency for the environment. How is that not a conflict of interest, given that you're in the Canadian cabinet? Is that why you never criticize China, the world's largest producer of plastic? Why are your staff pulling at me? Why are they assaulting me, sir? Why don't you ever criticize China? Have you received help from China in your political campaigns too? China refuses to sign the anti-plastics treaty. Why are you forcing that on Canadians?
What does mean the registry, Mr. Guilbeault? What do you mean by it? What is the cost that the organization and taxpayer will need to pay for your registry?
Run away! Run away! Steven Guilbeault. On the streets of Ottawa, I was running with my heavy backpack, had a few questions for him. He didn't want to answer. We'll have more later. Well, he did not like that. But, it was on the street. He was on the street, public person, public place, public sidewalk, public interest questions. He had nothing to say. Fair enough. He's not used to being asked real questions. What a huge entourage, by the way. I mean, holy moly. Why does he have that many staff? I'm not quite sure. We came back into the official conference area, and we all got emails. And by we all, I mean me, my intrepid cameraman, Lincoln J., who ran backwards for so much of that filming, Alexa Lavoie, Guillaume Roy, that's, of course, our French team here at Rebel News. We all got an email at the same time from the United Nations saying, our credentials were being suspended because of problems with our documents. What problems with our documents? They wanted to see our passports and our ID. We provided that for them weeks ago. They approved it. Because I asked a prickly question to Steven Guilbeault on the streets of Ottawa, not at the UN event, by the way, they suddenly said, you guys, your credentials are in jeopardy. Well, I'm in the building. I'm not going to leave. We got to the press conference early where Steven Guilbeault and 3 other senior leaders were going to meet, and the event was supposed to start at 1:15. Okay, we're all there. It doesn't start. 1:20. Doesn't start. 1:30. And where is everybody? Steven Guilbeault, he was the hero of the day. This is his big show. He wouldn't come in the room. They sent in a man in a suit. I didn't catch his name with my eyes. Maybe we caught it on camera. He said to Alexa, come outside, I want to talk to you. Alexa's smarter than that. She said, afterwards. Then he came to me and said, come outside, I want to talk to you. And I said, afterwards. I said, what's your name? And he said, he wouldn't tell me, but he said, I know who you are. Okay, well, I mean, I'm glad. So they waited another 5 minutes and another 5 minutes. And I was saying to my colleagues, I actually think they're considering calling off the press conference because Rebel News is here. And by the way, I sent a letter right then, an email to our lawyers, our criminal lawyer in town and our civil lawyer. And I said, get ready because I think they might actually come and have the police extricate us. Well, half an hour after the press conference was supposed to start, guess who walked in but Steven Guilbeault? And there I was sitting in the second row, smiling from ear to ear like a Cheshire cat. He said his blah, blah, blah. And then a lady from the UN was fielding questions, and I assumed that there was no way on God's green earth they weren't going to give me a question to ask. But I guess she had not been briefed by Guilbeault's team, and I was offered to ask a question. I actually turned around to see if it was someone behind me that she meant. No. So I actually put the same question to Guilbeault that I did on the street. I put it to him very calmly because the question is the question. I was sort of huffing and puffing on the street and I was hollering on the street and he was running away from me. But here we were at a press conference for which we were accredited and I was on my best behavior. I actually started with words I never thought I would say in my 52 years of life, which is thank you to the UN for accrediting us citizen journalists. Anyhow, here's how my question went and his answer. Take a look. Ezra Levant for Rebel News. And I'd like to thank the UN for accrediting a citizen journalist outlet like us. Mr. Guilbeault, according to the Globe and Mail, you serve on the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, which is a government agency controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Is that a conflict of interest with your role as a Canadian cabinet minister? And is it perhaps why you have really been gentle on China, even though it is by far the world's largest polluter, including with plastics pollution? Thanks again for letting me ask that question.
The Canada-China Council is an organization that has been in existence since, from memory, 1971 or 1972. And a succession of environment ministers from all colors and stripes, including under Stephen Harper, a number of environment ministers sat on this organization. It is a partnership where we exchange information on environmental issues and we work together to develop public policies that are implemented in China to tackle a number of the things that we're talking about here.
All right, so he had an answer, not a very good answer, but he should have answered me that way on the street, don't you think? I mean, yeah, I was huffing and puffing, but I wasn't swearing at him. I wasn't pushing him. His people were pulling me. I don't know if it was caught on tape, but one guy grabbed my backpack and tried to stop me from following him. And then to my surprise, my colleague Alexa Lavoie had a question too. Here's Alexa, and here's the answer she got.
Thank you, Alexa Lavoie for Rebel News. And my question is regarding, Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. She has expressed to fight against what she called absurd plastic bans. I want to have your thought about that.
I respectfully disagree with the Premier of Alberta on the plastic ban that Canada has put in place. But we don't think that we won't ban our way out of plastic pollution. But we do, and there is a large consensus here, and if you talk to delegates and experts from all around the world, there is an agreement that we should ban those plastics that are either non-recyclable or almost impossible to recycle, that have large impacts on the environment and on human health. But as Inger and others have said, and I've said myself, we will continue using plastic. We need to make sure that we ban those that we don't need, and that we continue using those that are essential in certain sectors like the medical sector, appliances, aeronautics, and we keep those plastics in the economy and out of the environment and out of our body.
Well, I tell you, of all the scenarios, I did not expect that one. When they sent in someone to ask us to leave, and when they delayed things by more than half an hour, I thought, oh boy, they're panicking. But in the end, it was actually the only good journalism there was there. Everyone else was just sort of a seal flapping their flippers. In fact, we decided not to leave the premises in case we were not allowed back in, and we sat there in a Greenpeace press conference. Well, first of all, what's Greenpeace doing having an official press conference at the United Nations? They're not part of the UN. They're an activist fundraising organization that systematically breaks the law in stunts to raise money for their perpetual motion machine. They almost never criticize Russia or OPEC or China. What are they doing having a press conference at a government-funded event here in Ottawa with the UN? Well, obviously, the answer is Steven Guilbeault, their most notorious alumnus. Steven Guilbeault, the Environment Minister, who used to be a Greenpeace activist, who's been arrested several times, including for breaking out of the CN Tower and causing a huge amount of problems there. And then that one atrocious day where he climbed onto the roof of Ralph Klein's house when Ralph Klein was out of town. It was just Ralph Klein's wife in the house. Imagine you're alone in a house, you're a mother, and you hear someone climbing on your roof in a bizarre stunt. Imagine how terrified you are. The maniac who did that was Steven Guilbeault. So, of course, he approved Greenpeace to have a press conference. But again, I was a credentialed journalist. They let me ask not one, but two questions. Here's how that went, and I put them very friendly. And here's what they said. I have a question for Greenpeace. It's a critical question, but I'd like your candid response to it. Greenpeace has been very active against oil and gas in Canada, and it's been successful in reducing that. But that hasn't reduced the amount of petroleum that the world demands. It's just shifted production from Canada to OPEC and Vladimir Putin's Russia. And I see the same thing here with plastics. China is by far the largest producer of plastic and polluter of plastic and all other pollution. And yet they have just a fraction of Greenpeace's attention. They do not appear willing to be part of any restriction on production. So if you're successful in limiting plastic production in the West, really all I think you're going to wind up doing is driving that production to China, which has lower environmental standards than we have in Canada and the United States. I don't think there's going to be one fewer plastic items produced after this treaty. It'll just be done in China, India, and other countries that aren't going to self-sacrifice. So I really want to know, do you consider that at all? Like, do you think it's a success that you've driven oil and gas production to the Qatars and the Vladimir Putins of the world? And will you think it's a success if you shut down factories in America and Canada, but build them up in China and other non-compliant countries? Thank you for letting me ask the question.
Thank you so much for your question. I mean, it's a valid question and something that, I can explain a bit the structure of Greenpeace, but Greenpeace, there is an international umbrella, and then we have different NROs in different regions, so we campaign globally. So Greenpeace does not campaign only on the West. I come from Middle East and North Africa. We have colleagues here from Greenpeace Africa, and we campaign on a local and national, and then at certain points, like INC and also the COP, we collectively join forces to campaign internationally on internationally binding agreements targeting fossil fuel industry. So in COP28, we have campaigned among allies and partners in order to get a binding, mention of fossil fuel reduction in line to Science 1.5C, collectively as Greenpeace, as different NROs. So I would say that Greenpeace is not a Western organization in that sense, but we are representative of different NROs who are campaigning for a global outcomes on fossil fuel, not specifically in Canada or on the West. This is my take.
So you have a very good point, and this is exactly why Greenpeace is campaigning for global targets and sector-specific targets. So it's not just going to be one country that is responsible for reduction. We're expecting that all countries contribute to reducing plastic production. We don't, coming from Asia, we definitely don't want any production bases to be transferred to our region in the world, because that means that the impacts of plastic production will be transferring to our countries. And what we're pushing for is that all countries collectively have to contribute to this reduction in plastic production, and all of them will abide by a single global target, and we figure out how these differentiated responsibilities will happen. It may be different timelines based on production capacity or countries, but at the same time, we all have to have that same goal of reducing plastic production together, because we don't want any of these effects to just transfer to different places, and different populations will be impacted by it.
Thank you for the question. I don't speak for Greenpeace. I speak for the scientific community. You may be following a long-term trend in sperm count, which is happening around the world, about 50% reduction in the last 5 decades. Projected losses of sperm by the middle of the century may make it very difficult for young men to reproduce the old-fashioned way. And that trend is even stronger in China now. Data came out about 2 years ago. And I should let you know that some of the best and a lot of the studies of endocrine disruption are being carried out by Chinese laboratories. They are struggling, the whole country is struggling right now, how to rebuild their fertility. They don't know. And we're pretty sure that plastic chemicals are contributing to it. So right now they may not be ready to act on these data, but they're going to have to.
I really appreciate the fact that you answered my critical question. I have one more critical question put in good faith. In Canada, I know some of you know that a couple of years ago, there was a large act of civil disobedience by the truckers. And they honked their horns and they broke some parking laws. And some of them were charged with mischief and some of them were put in jail. And they were peaceful political protesters. That has been one of Greenpeace's tactics in Canada. In fact, the Environment Minister used to be a Greenpeace activist, and he was convicted of mischief for breaking out of the CN Tower a couple decades ago. Given the fact that the courts have sentenced many of those trucker protesters to prison time, do you think it's appropriate that Greenpeace continue down that road? Or have you sort of grown up enough that you don't need to break the law for media attention? I mean, you're here, you've got a Greenpeace alumnus as the Environment Minister. You're here at the UN. Is it time for Greenpeace Canada to retire the law-breaking? I mean, our country's really had to deal with that over the last couple of years. Thanks for letting me put that question.
The right to protest is critically important to uphold, and in order for Greenpeace to hold corporations accountable, expose injustices. Sometimes we do engage in civil, nonviolent, direct action, and so it's critically important for us to uphold that right, and to uphold democracy, and so that's our position.
By the way, I think the truckers were over-prosecuted. They actually brought in the Emergencies Act and martial law. I was just asking them if, given the fact that truckers are arrested for mischief and sent to jail, and Guilbeault got, what, like a $1,000 fine or something, will they rethink their tactics? And, you know, it wasn't a very detailed answer by their Greenpeace Canada boss, who said, basically, no, we're going to keep breaking the law for cash. And why wouldn't you? Nothing happens to Greenpeace activists when they break the law. A slap on the wrist at most. If you're a trucker, though, go to jail. It was a very interesting day, and I'm glad I was here. I'm glad I was credentialed, and why wouldn't I be? I mean, other than the obvious reason is that we're asking questions that are mildly critical of the UN. I thought it was worthwhile coming, and I thought it was worthwhile flying the flag of Rebel News. I don't know if my friends will be allowed back tomorrow. I'm actually off to New York City. I want to cover the insane race. I don't know what you call it. Don't buy from Jews. Don't let Jews onto campus. The insane things going on in New York City. So I'm actually going to be there tomorrow. I want to check out what's happening at Columbia and what's happening at NYU. It's a hop, skip, and a jump down from here, so I'm going. But my colleagues, Alexa and Guillaume, will remain here, and I think Sheila Gunn-Reid's planning on coming here. It'll be interesting to see if Steven Guilbeault's rage at being asked those prickly questions on the street will cause the UN to blacklist us again. I don't know the answer to that question. As I say, we've engaged our law firm already. Hopefully that will allow, hopefully the UN will calm down and let us stay here. We've behaved very well, I have to say. Would you agree with me? You've seen me ask questions a lot over the course of my life. Would you agree with me that the questions I posed to first Steven Guilbeault and then second to Greenpeace in those press conferences were probably the gentlest, softest, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, politest questions I've ever asked in my life. In fact, I have to say, my first question, I think the Greenpeace people actually enjoyed answering it. We'll see if we're banned again tomorrow. And you know what? I've learned a lot over the years. You might recall that the UN, at the behest of the Liberals, banned us from attending their global warming conferences about 8 years ago now. And I didn't know how to fight back as effectively as I do now. So help me God, if they ban my colleagues tomorrow, they can expect litigation in ways they've never imagined before. We deserve to be accredited because our conduct here at the UN convention was exemplary. The only possible reason they're now claiming our documents are insufficient is because I asked some embarrassing questions of that buffoon outside, Steven Guilbeault, that has nothing to do with our conduct here in the conference. Anyways, that's the show for today. What a hoot. Until next time, on behalf of Rebel News, whether it's here in Ottawa or anywhere around the world, to you at home, good night. And keep fighting for freedom.